Why did we go down this tangent?
You definitely put me on the spot.
Welcome to Cult ID, the youth cultural identity program by young women discussing current issues and gender disparity in the sound production industry.
Be the one who made the collective vision come to fruition.
Brought to you by the Department of Communities and Justice, River FM and TheArthouse.
It's a long way to the shop if you want a sausage roll.
Oh!
Yeah. Hello, welcome to River FM. I'm Janelle and this is the second ever Cult ID, Youth Cultural Identity podcast project for women and young girls. And I have Hannah with me. Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Are you excited to be doing the radio?
I'm very excited.
Yes. Well, what we're doing here is we're giving training to women and young girls to try and address the gender disparity in the sound production industry, which is have recently found that it's gone from 95% to 97% male heavy. So we're really trying to get women and young girls not only in radio, but later on we're going to be doing some editing. So that is not only podcasting and content creation, but eventually we might even get into some music creation and video casting, which will be fun down the track.
Very exciting.
Yeah, cool. All right, so I have to read the weather. I'll do that. And later on for our listeners, apart from, of course, fabulous Australian music, we will be coming back with a chat about climate change, something that's very much on the minds of, well, everybody at the moment, considering the disasters we've had over the last couple of years, but for the youth especially, because that is their perceived future. Hopefully not. Yeah. All right, so the weather. A low-pressure system lies off the New South Wales Central Coast with a trough laying back across northeastern New South Wales. The trough continues to interact with a humid air mass of tropical origin to generate widespread rain. The low will move away from the coast today as the trough crosses northeastern New South Wales. Meanwhile, a high approaching from the west will extend a ridge into the state's west, which will push eastward today as the trough and low move away. This high will remain dominant during the early part of the coming week, bringing a period of relatively benign weather before the next trough arrives at midweek. So for the rest of Sunday, we have a cloudy medium 60% chance of showers, becoming less likely in the afternoon. There is a chance of a thunderstorm, and the daytime maximum temperatures are in the mid-20s. We got a slight, partly cloudy, medium percent of chance of showers in the north on Monday, 60%, and then getting lower to 30% Tuesday and 20% on Wednesday. And the temperatures are all in the low 20s there. So I was quite worried, Hannah, at the beginning of the week where seemed like there was going to be a lot of rain hitting New South Wales, and just assumed that, of course, it'd be Lismore. But actually, it's all gone inland and then down to Sydney. So Sydney's been copping it a lot.
Yeah, my sister lives down in Sydney, so she's been really getting a lot of that and a lot of the cold. But yeah, like earlier this week, we got sent out the weather warning from the SES, and that wasn't a very good thing to see, especially when we've had such traumatic weather at the start of this year. Yeah,
we're all very triggered, aren't we? And then that potential third one with the La Nina event.
Yeah.
But I have a little feeling that we're going to be okay.
I've heard that with the La Nina, it's the third year in a row we've had one, it's going to be less intense than it has been in the past few years.
Oh, that'd be good, wouldn't it? So today we're going to be talking about climate change, and one of the big signifiers for this conversation is the way that it affects youth. So I was saying to you earlier, Hannah, when I was growing up, it wasn't until I was about 20 that climate change became something that was more and more within media and more of a problem. But I'm probably one of those last generations that grew up and had a childhood that was free of the fear of climate change. So I know it's a heavy topic, but you've expressed that you're all right to talk about how that felt growing up as a child with that looming over your head.
Yeah. Well, the first time I fully kind of understood what climate change was and global warming and similar things was around the age of 5 or 6. And I think growing up with such a negative possible future that's it just kind of makes life difficult. And like I was saying before, growing up with that and always having that around, I think something that the youth find really difficult today is finding the balance between ignorance, you could say, so that as to not stress yourself out and get negative effects.
What you were saying was a healthy balance, healthy mediums in all things, where you're not stressed out to the point where your mental health is affected, but also not going so far as to totally ignore it, because that's part of the problem.
And so I think a lot of youth find it hard to find that balance between doing the right thing and helping with the climate crisis and supporting themselves and their healthy mindset, and finding that balance between is really difficult, especially since we're us in the generation above us are probably the first people to have this throughout our childhood, and so we don't really have other generations to guide us on how to feel about it, especially going through it in your formative years.
Yeah, well, I'm at a loss because I didn't have to. So you guys have hit the ground running. You're having to navigate through this treacherous world in ways never before seen. And hopefully through whether it's direct action or through political change, something turns around so that this is not your entire life, because that would be tragic. And so we did talk about that, what's some potential possibilities for turning it around, and you had a couple of ideas.
Yeah, so I think there's lots of different scales that everyone, youth, but every single person in the community, there's different levels we can take action on. You know, there's things closer to home, such as your plant-based diet, or sourcing out your food a bit more ethically and eco-friendly. And then there's things such as within the community, volunteering for the flood relief and similar things to that, cleanups. And then I feel one of the major issues is the government, the higher up, the government. And although a lot of our voices have been heard by them, it's about getting the message out there and getting enough action. I think it's all about the government action. And so there's a lot of things we can all do. So
one of the things that's relevant for this area, and especially for youth, and if you're of a leftist ideology, so your parents might have been hippies or whatever, then there's a dangerous narrative running through there that politics does nothing. They're all owned by a big brother, big pharma, whatever it is, big coal. So voting is useless, so why bother? And I think that's a really dangerous narrative. And we did speak about, my personal opinion, one of the biggest things is political donations. So if we were to vote in a party, and to my knowledge, the Greens is the only one that has this policy, that to ban major political donations to parties, then we've done, I think personally, 80 to 90% of the damage resolved right there, because no longer will you have coal, big pharma, big oil being able to manipulate the politicians through donations, and therefore the politicians will be forced to not just chase the that dollar, but they're actually chasing votes. And that's where the people will have actual power, because now the voices seem a little bit unheard.
Yeah. And going back to what you said before about people thinking that what's the point in voting for, I think that's such a dangerous view, because at the end of the day, if one person has that view, what's the point in voting or this or that, then that means so many other people are also going to be thinking the same. And so you might think, I'm one person, my vote won't make a difference. But just in the same way that there's groups of people who all have the same thought. Even if you think you're the only one, there's so many more. And having so many people not voting, especially if they're all in like a left wing or whatever it is, it can really make the government just full of politicians that don't represent the actual views of the community and of Australia, because such a significant portion of people didn't vote. And so I think it's important that everyone goes and votes.
Yeah. And it's important to educate yourself on what you are voting for.
Yeah.
I remember when my father was still with us, he said to me, who are you going to vote for when you get older? And I said, well, I don't know enough about politics, so therefore I'm not going to vote because I don't want to make an uneducated guess. And he pointed out and he said, look at that cow cocky over there, Janelle. Do you think he's been better educated than you? And I went, no. And he goes, and that guy's voting, and he's going to vote who his parents voted for and who his grandparents voted for, you know, and that's the problem with the right-wing type voting too, is that they are voters, they are highly educated, and so if you're of that leftist opinion, I don't want to educate myself enough to go in and have that vote, then that's how we keep getting these right-wing governments in. So we are lucky because we just got through on the Labor, because ScoMo did such a terrible job, but let's hope in the future we might get a government that's got the wherewithal to ban political donations, because then we'll start to see some real change.
Yeah, I think so.
And also you mentioned that you're a vegetarian, and that's a very much a climate change decision, you said.
Yeah. I think, you know, there is a part of the reasoning being like the animals, but overall the main reason I went vegetarian and I was vegan for a portion of time is because for me, I believe that the impacts of the meat industry and similar industries, it's detrimental. And I think if we continue producing meat and other animal products in such a like factory way, in such like small spaces,
mass production,
yeah. I think that's not something that I want to contribute to.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah. And so I have nothing wrong with like family-owned farms or smaller businesses with farms and that sort of production, but once it gets to the mass production of these products, that's kind of where I draw the line, and so I'd prefer stay away from meat altogether. Just so I'm not getting anywhere near that line. I think for me it just kind of takes a bit of the guilt away.
Yeah, okay, and less a footprint.
And less of a footprint.
And that goes back to that ideology of self, which so back in the day we used to say, think globally, act locally. Yeah. But it's and act individually. So whether or not it's as simple as recycling or becoming vegetarian, if more people did it, there'd be less of a problem.
Exactly. And so I feel like this is part of what my part in this fight for the climate is.
I remember once saying something naively about if we were to go around and spend more money educating women in third world countries about birth control, therefore we'd have less people on the planet, so therefore that would be better for the environment. And somebody pointed out that actually for one Western person in a developed nation, that's 20 people in a third world country. That's how heavy our footprint is. That's how much more energy and food and everything that we produce compared to people in third world countries. So that's something to think about in regards to your footprint. But we mentioned too with the cow thing about fallowed land. Yeah. So it's only 2 or 3 generations that we've started to mass produce meat in the fashion that we have, because once upon a time you'd have a family, like you said, with a little tract of land, and then they would have 2 paddocks and swap them over. So that's not only creating the carbon being put back in the soil through the plants themselves.
Yeah.
But, it's stopping that mass production as well.
Yeah.
And a Sunday roast was a big deal.
Exactly.
And people would celebrate that as opposed to, eating burgers 2-3 times a day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that it's not always about, like, no one should feel like they have to go vegetarian or have to do this or that to help the environment, because I think everyone should have the choice themselves, but I think it's all about educating yourself.
Yeah.
Educating yourself on maybe the reasons why people go vegetarian or the way that your food's produced or all these different factors. And I think everyone needs to be accountable for their education.
And Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, is well known for saying we need to be closer to the means of our own production.
Yeah.
He was talking about it from a political point of view of control, because as soon as you make the people fear that their food is going to run out, then you've got control over those people. And that's what globalization has done, is we're only 6 meals away from a revolution, for instance. So if we had, and also transport in terms of globalization, how ridiculous it is that we might grow the food up here, send it to Sydney, and then the Sydney people get the pick of the stuff in those early markets, and then whatever doesn't get picked comes back to us through Woolies and Coles and such. It's just such a stupid system where I can imagine every town having its own little hydroponics or outdoor, or even every every building having its own garden on the top of the roof or whatever, and then a little cloning factory inside. We talked about cloned meat, and that's very much going to be a future thing, and so we'd be interested to find out who would actually eat it and who wouldn't. So that's going to be coming in the future. And also insects. Yes,
there's a lot about insects. I don't know. I've always thought about whether I would go back to eating meat and animals and insects.
Yeah, well, insects being smaller, does that mean they have smaller little consciousnesses and souls? I don't know.
I don't know.
That's a hard one.
And so when it comes to like cloning and everything, I'm always like, would I go back to eating meat if it's produced in that ethical and eco-friendly way? Or... it's a difficult thing.
It's a conundrum, isn't it? But it's food for thought, no pun intended. And we'll continue on with some songs in a minute. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about climate change just at this point, Hannah?
Pretty much just try and question the beliefs that you already have regarding climate change and know that you can make a bigger difference than you think, as an individual and as a group and a community, and just educate yourself and question what you already believe.
Yeah, and happy mediums in all things, because we did say mental health is such a huge thing for the youth, and especially around that fear for future. Yeah. So by no means ignore it to the point where you're part of the problem, but also don't obsess about it to the point where that problem is part of you.
Hey guys, this is Cult ID. We are back. I hope you enjoyed those songs. You were just listening to, first was Rushing Back by Flume and Vera Blue, then Slow Mover by Angie McMahon, then Fool's Gold, Jack River, and that one just then was Happy Song by Alex the Astronaut.
I love your choices, Hannah. They've been great today.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we've mainly been playing Australian women.
Yeah.
And whilst we are going to talk more about climate change, I think it is probably important to tell the listeners at this time, because I'm closer, that the reason we were funded to do this radio/podcast videocast project was off the back of the gender disparity in the music industry, and that sort of informed our playlist today, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got all Australian singer-songwriters. We might have flipped in one or two Australian men in there, but because, we just love some songs. But, we're just trying to support women in the music industry and really get young women and young girls to come along and be involved in radio. And so that can then translate into further jobs in sound production. So whether that's becoming a sound engineer or getting into film like you may be getting into at some stage down the track, or even just producing your own music. So on that note, if you are a woman or young girl or identifying and between the ages of 14 and 24, please contact us here at Cult ID, brought to you by The Arthouse. And my email is thearthouse@2ncr.org.au, and or look us up on Facebook and Insta now.
Insta as well, yep.
I've actually gone Insta because that's what the young'uns are doing these days.
Yeah, that's where you'll find us.
Yes, yeah. So you were saying that during this big natural disaster that you're not from Lismore, you're more Lennox Head based.
Yeah.
And there's something that went on with your school. Did you want to tell the listeners?
Yeah, so while all the floods were happening earlier this year, my school kind of took on the role as the Ballina Hospital, and then a lot of the retirement homes came and became housed at our school, as well as just a lot of other displaced people. And I think something that is often not spoken as much about when referring to the floods is the impact that the floods had on the volunteers, especially people like myself and other kids at my school. I think having to take on the responsibility of caring for the displaced people, getting food for them, helping them get dressed, get up, walk around, all those sorts of things, it had a big impact. Yeah.
And so we're talking about mental health post disaster here, and of course the people who spent the nights on the roof, one of the most traumatic things anybody could imagine. And if you are one of these people, then please do seek out counselling, help for whatever you need, and you can find that too down at the Resilience Hub. And whether or not that's just having a quick chat to a naturopath and getting some vitamins, or that's getting links towards counselling, there's so much out there, and it's so very important for you to do so. But we were also talking about how it's important not to juxtapose the difference in people and the different ways people experience trauma, because there have been some volunteers, for instance, or peripheral people around this disaster. So if you are one of those peripheral people, please also seek out that help.
Yeah. And I think whether you're a person who was impacted directly by the floods, or you were a volunteer, or like you said, someone on the perimeter. I think that those two experiences can't necessarily be compared, because one is watching, more of an observer, and one is the experience. And I think when people begin comparing to those two as traumatic incidences and saying this one's more than that, or this, it doesn't really work, because they're two, even though it's around the same issue, they're two completely separate issues and experiences.
The same can be said for any trauma, any mental health. It's a dangerous, slippery slide, that one. And also you might have somebody who's very good at dealing with trauma and it has experienced things that are unfathomable, and they might be a lot better than somebody who hasn't, and vice versa. So it's a gradient.
Yes.
It's not it's not as black and white. It's very complicated. But what is important is, if you are feeling like you need help, get it.
Yeah. Even if you're not sure if you need help, get it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see a counsellor say to somebody, why are you here? I don't think you need any help. But, it has happened before. So, and that's a good thing too. So around the disaster that just happened, and you were saying that you experienced the school situation.
Yeah.
what I found really upsetting, having been through 2017, was the government did not have better situations in place. In Lismore, for instance, it was the university.
Yeah.
And I wasn't here, but I heard that it was an absolute nightmare, and it still exists. So some of the problems that are happening now is our most socio-economically challenged people, our poorest, the drug affected, these people are now displaced from north and south or wherever, and they've put them, a lot of these people, up in rows in pods up near the university.
Yeah.
And so I've heard through the grapevine that there's lots of troubles up there with mental health and around safety and danger. So, for instance, with the emergency evacuation centre, at one stage there was a breakaway where they had all the drug affected people living outdoors underneath one of the eaves, and there was hardly any security because they didn't have a situation in place for those people to be safely housed.
Yeah.
But they had to keep them separate away from the other people because of violence and such. And nobody wants to have to feel as though they're being threatened by a drug-affected person when they're in a emergency disaster situation.
And a traumatic situation.
Yeah.
Don't want to further that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a huge failing on the in regards to the evacuation centres. So hopefully that's going to be addressed for future situations. Hopefully there's none, but you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a lot more like a plan set out for if things like this were to happen again. I think there needs to be different places that are specifically certified for each different use, know exactly who's going to get housed where, like what types of people, and just leave less to the unknown, I guess.
That's be prepared.
Exactly.
Yes, and so when it comes to climate change and whether it's bushfire or flood, you do need to have an evacuation plan.
Yep.
And so me being in the WOC with my arts collective, we've had to rethink about how we're going to do the art.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a van, and so any of the paintings will have to be no bigger than the van, for instance, and have a plan to get them out, because prior to this one, there were lofts in my warehouse that had never seen flood before. And it was built in 1910. So it's been flooded quite a few times. So this last beast changed the narrative. So no longer can we store our stuff in our roofs, or no longer can we decide to stay in north and south and think that it might not go above floor level. We have to have these early warning systems. So here's a tragic little tidbit for you, Hannah. 2 weeks before this big flood, our local council approached the state government to get the early warning systems upriver upgraded.
Oh.
Yep, and the state government said, no, they'll be fine.
Oh.
Yeah, so...
I was not aware of that.
Yep, yes, thanks, state government. So we had less than 6 hours or something warning. If they upgraded them, we can have a lot more warning, which means we can get people out of north and south.
Since the recent floods occurred, have the state government said they'll
upgrade
the warning system, or
they've said a lot of things. The problem with bureaucracy is that it has to go through so many middlemen. Yeah. And at this point I will use the term men. Obviously there's some females in politics, but and also when you're starting to talk about engineering, then anyway,
unbalanced.
I won't go down that road, but it's, you know what, let's do some research. And next time when we come back, we'll have those stats, because I want to know what's going to happen not only with the early warning system, which apparently all you need to do is get laser lights.
Yeah.
And then once the water rushes at a certain speed, then they know that it's going to be a major event. They can never tell how major, but
it's still good to have that
early warning. Yeah.
And it's better to prepare for the worst and it not be that bad than have 6 hours.
That's right. And so that's right, back to the art. And so it's informed our artistic process. So we're going to be doing more digital art, we're going to be doing more sound production, more live performance. It's easier to pick up a laptop and get out than it is, say, for instance, an exhibition. You know, I was working on a sculpture exhibition, so I lost that, including my entire life's work, which it was sort of hard to come to terms with that sense of loss, because not just myself, but everybody's talking around this narrative of the loss. So just things, of course, but for the arts community, it was, very devastating. I mean, we lost the regional art gallery. Yeah. It's coming back. You know, we're resilient. We're going to do it. But, it was just an absolute tragedy. The Hanna cabinet, I believe, has been sent to Canberra to be restored.
Yeah.
And then loss of life was obviously the worst one.
Yeah.
We lost Margaret Graham from this very radio show. Station. She had a show here for 40 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
So she was an elderly lady that got trapped and was one of the 8. And then, of course, we lost John Lush, who I went to the performance last night, which I just wanted to mention. It's called Thol, the Tholi Spirit, and Thol is the humans of Lismore. And so, yes, this John Lush person was a huge character. And it was such a gorgeous tribute to him. Well done, Isaac, out there, and all the rest of the band and whoever contributed, because it was such a huge night. And perhaps I might even get Isaac on to discuss with you how fantastic it went.
I would love that.
Yes. Would you like to do more interviews and...
Oh, I would love to do interviews.
Reviews?
Yes.
Well, that's the other exciting thing, because it's been 8 months now, so we can start to go out and people again, because we went through 2 years of COVID and then we had, a couple of months, and then we had this major disaster.
Yeah.
And so now the Rochdale Theatre is back in operation. We've got the Metropole, and I'm just trying to think of youth-related spaces. Let's get back to the listeners on that one.
We'll do some research.
But that's a really good talking point post-disaster and from a youth perspective.
Yeah.
Where do the kids go to have fun these days? Do you know? Where do you go to have fun these days?
For me, I go to the beach a lot, but we've only just been able to get back to the beach since the floods, because water was just full of sewage and those sorts of things.
And furniture.
Oh, and
apparently the whole of Lismore, I had a friend watch it go out Ballina outlet.
And there was cows.
I saw a dead cow
in the river, and which the river feeds directly into the ocean. So a lot of the different things, like going to the beach, even just going for a walk outside, especially living near the beach like I do, the air
was worse down trying to go for a walk down the river, I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's still a little bit skanky down there. There's a tree that's catching a whole bunch of debris. And I was thinking, why doesn't the council get the barge out and just move the tree along so it can all flow down river? That's at the boat ramp. Yeah.
I used to work at a restaurant just like pretty much on the beach. And during the time of the floods, the smell in the air was horrible. You could just smell all the sewage and mud and everything from the ocean.
Yeah.
And
so one of the big things that they talk about in regards to water remediation, and this is valid not only for Lismore and its disasters, but the whole climate change discussion that we're having, is that because of farming, once again, a lot of trees have been taken away from riverbanks. So not only does the toxic chemicals that they put on the cows to make sure they don't get fly blown or whatever go into the waterways, which is bad pollutant, it erodes, the lack of trees erode the riverbanks, but also they don't suck up the moisture, so it makes flooding worse. So one of the remediations that hopefully our council and our state government really push farmers to do is replant along our riverways.
Yeah.
And that would seriously reduce the amount of volume of water that's coming through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so back to that conversation about mental health, though, and what are the youth doing?
Yeah.
What would you like to see not only for you in your town near the beach. It's a bit different with beach towns because there's all those sports around the ocean that can be heaps of fun.
Exactly.
But say, for instance, the Lismore youth, what are your suggestions for them to be able to start doing things? I, of course, would go straight to music and maybe a little concert or a exhibition or something.
I think something that would be really effective is just having a space where the youth and kids and just all ages are able to get together for different interests and just come back together as a community. Because, for example, Trinity, their school, they're
all up at the uni.
So they're unable to attend at the moment. So having a space where kids can get together, maybe if they enjoy music, they can come here and do this, or if they enjoy sport, they can go here and play some games and stuff, just so they can reconnect with the people their age doing the things they love. I think that would be really beneficial.
And like I said, we repurpose the space in terms of art, because I'm down in the Walk. Why don't we repurpose those spaces in town for those businesses that had lots of stock or whatever and they didn't want to reopen? Let's have a dedicated space to performance art for youth, dance workshops, sport workshops, art.
Dramatic art.
Yeah, theatre, perfect. And all of these things are non-tangible. So it doesn't matter, even if it's computer games, right? You could have a dedicated computer space for young people to get together, and even though they might be online, there's something about the physical presence of chatting in between.
And even if they're, just playing the online games or whatever it is, and they're around other people doing the same, even if they're not speaking, it's just the connection of I'm like you and you're like me. We're both doing the same thing, we're the same age, where we can relate to each other. And I think that's being able to relate and find people who you can relate to and feel connected to is really important.
Yes, and I would like to see some studies, if anybody's done anything around pheromones in regards to socialisation. And that doesn't have to be sexual. I'm just talking about the physical presence of being in somebody else's physical presence, and whether that has a latent subconscious physiological effect on human beings in terms of mental health. Because you might have a really good online social presence with people around the world, but if you're always on your own, I'm just wondering how healthy that is in terms of pheromones. I think it would be an interesting study. Yeah,
that would be.
But you know what? We've got about 10 minutes to go, Hannah.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think we should sign off, and I want to say thank you for coming in, and you've done a fabulous job today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I've enjoyed myself.
Cool, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more from you in the future. And do watch this space, because once we've got a few more shows down, we'll be announcing where you can find our podcasts.
It's an exciting thing.
Yes. And
you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, so what are you going to take us out with, Hannah?
Oh, let me have a sneaky peek.
Well, yeah, just one sec.
One moment, everyone.
Yeah. So do go on about what do you think the youth can do?
I think my final message for all the youth is, I think, reach out not only for professional help if you need that, but reach out to friends, reach out to potential friends, and just aim to find a way to connect with each other and connect with people who make you feel good about not only yourself but about the community that you're involved in and about the things that you enjoy and that you love. And I think that's what's most important. Just reach out and connect with others.
And I think you've actually hit the nail on the head in regards to one very important factor. If we bring what you said at the very beginning about being actively involved in climate change from an individual perspective, be actively involved in creating those spaces for you to be able to socialise. Go to the local council, tell them what you want, or even just ask your parents if they can ring up and see if they can get a dedicated space, or if somebody can be the facilitator adult, whomever it is, in order for these spaces to start happening, because that's how things are done. They don't just get handed to you. Sometimes you have to make things happen.
Yeah, whether it be you just send the council an email, send it to a certain, like, the owners of, like, a certain space.
There's an entertainment officer. You could probably send it to him.
Send it to them.
Yeah.
Call up on the phone. Do whatever feels right and within your ability, obviously, but do what feels right and reach out to whoever you can.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And this has been Why Cult ID, brought to you by River FM, TheArthouse, and the Department of Communities and Justice. Bye.
Thank you.